Welcome to Silicon Heartland Sessions, where we get to know the amazing leaders in our tech community. Today, I'm talking with Chris Berry, President, CEO, and founder of OhioX. Thanks for joining me today, my friend. We've got a lot to discuss.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I appreciate you having me and looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too, man. So, my understanding is that OhioX is Ohio's statewide nonprofit technology and innovation partnership, whose mission is to make Ohio a world leader in tech and innovation. That sound familiar?
That sounds familiar. It also sounds very long, which is on us. Uh, in
I
short,
pulled it right off your website.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're redoing a lot of that because it's due time. But yeah, so in short, we're a statewide tech nonprofit. I like to say it's a bit like a tech chamber of commerce, and our mission is to build Ohio's tech hub. And so we get to work with a ton of great companies and organizations along the way, and it's a really fun job, and I'm really lucky to get to do it.
Oh, I bet. That sounds awesome. So, within the context of that tech hub, for those who aren't familiar with OhioX, what kind of companies are we talking about? Like, what companies are a part of this technology hub?
Yeah, great question. So our members and partners are literally every sector, every industry, every size. So we have everything from Fortune 500 companies, some headquartered here, the name brands, some not headquartered here, but they've, made literally billion-dollar investments into the states, into our state. We also have startups. We have tech
Mhm.
small businesses. We have universities, hospital systems, research organizations, nonprofits. And so it's a really diverse coalition of companies and organizations, all shapes, all sizes, but all are passionate about Ohio's tech opportunity and what we can do to hopefully kind of build out the Silicon Heartland that we're all talking about, that you're talking with people on. And so they're from all parts of the state, all corners, all regions, all sectors, all industries, all sizes. But everyone is really passionate about our state's tech opportunity, which hasn't always existed. And it feels like we're a
Mhm.
bit back in the game.
Yeah.
And as someone who grew up in Northeastern Ohio and Akron, I have seen when sectors and industries leave our state, leave our country, and what that can do to communities. And so, this kind of revitalization that I think tech is leading in a lot of ways is just so amazing to see. And again, our members and partners are, right there at the forefront helping lead the charge.
Excellent. What do you think makes Ohio so special in terms of, aspiring to build this tech hub? I mean, it's no it, it's on purpose that we use the term Silicon Heartland, just like, out in California. That word Silicon Valley, Silicon Heartland, we've got high aspirations. What is it that makes Ohio so special?
Yeah, I think there's two parts. And they can be a bit cliche, but I'll explain both. One is the people, and then the legacy. So the people today,
Hmm.
Ohioans are just so incredibly kind. And what makes our state a bit unique is for states our size, there's typically one large city that everything kind of flows to in terms of economic impact and where the industries are, and certainly where tech is. And so you look at it, Illinois, and there's Chicago. So Chicago, Illinois. You look at Massachusetts, you have Boston. You look at Georgia, you have Atlanta, and in states like Arizona, you have Phoenix. But our state, we have these really big metro areas that are very spread out. So the top, the big three are Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. They're spread
Hmm.
out by 90 minutes from Cincinnati to Columbus, two and a half from Columbus to Cleveland. And so we're a little bit different, and more like a Texas or a California or a Florida. We don't have the overall population size, but we're really spread out. And so that's kind of one key, and I'm sure we can talk more about that in a bit. But as we
Hmm.
think about the people, it doesn't matter if you're from Cincinnati or Cleveland or anywhere in between. People are just really incredibly kind. I don't know who said this phrase, but in a place like Ohio, you can have a first conversation with anyone as long as you make it intentional, and it's up to you
Hmm.
whether or not you're going to have a second conversation. But the kind of degree of
That's well said.
separation where the community is just so cohesive and strong is just really incredible. And I hear from whether it's entrepreneurs or just technologists, leading companies that doesn't exist in places like on the East or West Coast necessarily.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a real testament to just the work life balance and kind of this harmony of being able to have it all in Ohio. And then the second is we just have this incredible legacy of Ohioans, and I don't know if it's something in the water or what, but whether it's Jesse Owens or Neil Armstrong that have done really incredible things that are literally like you know, on top of the world. So Neil Armstrong, he's on the moon. Jesse Owens, he's making these
Really?
amazing statements and doing incredible things out of Ohio State and at the Olympics. And so we just really have this, LeBron James and people that are Ohioans, but they go on to do these amazing things on a world stage. And you kind of put up, kind of per capita across the country of where do people that truly impact the globe come from?
Mhm.
And I would have to think, I haven't crunched the numbers, so maybe I'll do that later, but that Ohio's kind of up there. And so you kind
Heck
of
yeah.
combine this like niceness, which is really nice. If you've spending time on the coast, you don't necessarily find it there, with just
This
this
is
like
true.
incredible passion for wanting to impact our world. And that isn't anything new with some of the people I just mentioned. And so I think you kind of meld those two things, and there's just like an incredible opportunity that exists. That what that secret sauce is and what's in the water, I don't necessarily know, but I suspect it's a lot of good people that want to make an impact, and they push each other to to do just that. And so it's kind of this, you know, amazing thing when you think about just Ohio and our history and legacy and all that our state has accomplished, but it's the people that are doing it.
Right. Wow, that is very, very well said. I'm not an Ohio native, to be honest with you. I moved here in '96, and I grew up out west. Not on the coast, but I was Rocky Mountain area. And I'll tell you, it was never intended to be like a forever thing. And I got here and I just fell in love with Ohio. Other folks in the community, and we see this at technology events across Columbus. I'm sure it's the same thing in Cleveland and in Cincinnati. But our the way I think of it is, and I'm stealing this from Ben Blankera, by the way. So our superpower is really that kindness and our ability, our desire to collaborate together and work on things together.
Yeah, it's pretty special, and I think you see that in all corners. There's and I've spent time outside of Ohio, and my first job was on the East Coast after school. And
Oh yeah.
um, when I moved out to Washington D.C. after college, and I took my job, my three roommates were people that I met in college going to Ohio.
Hmm.
The house next door was three guys that were Ohioans. And there's just Ohio flags everywhere, and DC is kind of a cool place, especially when you're young, because no one's really from there. And
Hmm.
so people kind of fall into these cliques, but the clique that kind of I fell into was just Ohioans. And it's pretty, it was a pretty cool thing because you're not home any longer. And I grew up in Ohio, went to school in Ohio, and I'm living in a big East Coast city. But I'm still surrounded by Ohioans, and there's kind of a it's funny, all the different state kind of delegations, and I use that loosely, not like part of like Congress necessarily, but in
Hmm.
DC where you have all these different states that are out there. You'll walk down the street, of course, like the Texas flag, that's pretty predominant, but like you'd go to these Ohio birthday parties for our state, birthday, and it would just be packed. You'd see every university flag there. And it was just a really cool thing that, living in a city that's not home, you're kind of doing something unique for the first time in your life, living outside of the state you grew up in. But
Hmm.
you're still kind of in this Ohio community that, that's kind of always stood with me, which has been pretty neat.
Yeah, no kidding. And as you sort of engage with government officials, do you see that those values of kindness and collaboration, also manifesting themselves within the halls of state government offices and so forth across Ohio?
Yeah, I mean, you hope to think, all of us, right, as like taxpayers and residents, that people are, doing things for the good of Ohio, and I think that's largely true. I mean, just with any large group of people, you're going to find some interesting folks that maybe aren't there for the right reasons. But I
Hmm.
personally had a chance to work in government for 8 years in Ohio, in state government, and I just personally, and I think my colleagues did too, found it incredibly rewarding where you're working on things that impact the state and impact residents and taxpayers. And I always just found that so interesting where, you're doing things that matter to 11.5 million Ohioans. And we got to do some really neat things. And you're kind of, kind of driven by wanting to do well for your state and the citizens and the residents that are there. And also
Hmm.
there's, kind of when you work in state government, there's a bit of friendly competition between the other 49 states where you want to be doing things that are kind of leading. And You see other states kind of pop up and maybe they'll do things first or kind of lead on something. And there always kind of seem to be kind of a cohort of a group of states that kind of thought the same way in terms of like wanting to kind of be innovative, because you're not always incentivized in government to do things innovative because it costs money. You have the elected
Yeah,
officials that,
makes sense.
sometimes they don't understand technology. But when you kind of get that meld of an elected official, of government leaders that care about tech, care about innovation, caring about doing well. There's some really, really cool stuff. I mean, I think in our state we have right now, I don't know if there is a state government that cares more about tech and innovation than ours in the country. And I would certainly argue that, that they are probably the most passionate for making Ohio an innovative place for the benefit of taxpayers. And if anyone's been, for instance, to the BMV recently, you can check in on your phone, so you don't have to go there, check in, wait an hour, and something as simple
Yep.
as that. Like, why hadn't that ever been done before? And I guess if you go across the country, you're probably not going to find that as a solution. And so there's
Yep.
just, there's little things, but at the end of the day, it's all about kind of, service to taxpayers, the kind of customer service that government can provide. Because we all have the same needs and wants of, clean streets and trash being picked up and being able to go to the BMV and renew your license on your birthday and not have to sit around for 3 hours and make it really
Right.
difficult. So yeah, government, it can be a really great place for technologists, and I think sometimes gets overlooked as a place for technologists because there's not as much money there, and it's just the budgets kind of are different.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, you get to work on things that literally impact everyone.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So that said, where do you see, like the majority of the major innovations coming from?
Yeah, so in terms of there's kind of the two sides. One is the policy side, so kind of the laws and the regulations. California, which makes sense. Oh, if we're not talking about Ohio at the moment, they do a lot. Which, of course, that's where Silicon Valley is. That's where all the tech giants are located. So, as you see things about AI laws and rules and regulations, oftentimes a state like California will lead the way. But
Yeah.
with government, it's completely dependent on who's in elected office, and so you can have the most innovative and technology friendly elected official, say a governor or lieutenant governor or whomever. But as soon as they're out of office, if that next person doesn't have that same passion or interest, like that
Hmm.
state can like completely flip a switch and kind of go back to like go back to zero. And so right now Colorado, for instance, has a governor that's pretty tech forward and thinks about these things. We're part of a national organization called the Technology Councils of North America, so I get to be with my counterparts in states like Oregon and Arizona. So you oftentimes hear what they're seeing from their own elected officials. And going back to Ohio and having this friendly kind of passion for tech and innovation at the moment. I'll talk with some of my counterparts across the country, and it can be quite the opposite experience for them. Where if an elected official comes into office and thinks tech is bad for A, B, and C reasons, it can be really, really tough for their tech sector and ecosystem. And so,
Hmm.
there's some of them that'll come to, our gatherings and be like, our governor or our mayor, they hate us. And, that's just not the case in Ohio, where, we have an incredibly supportive, elected officials that, whether it's at the state level or a bunch at the local level, care about this, whether it's entrepreneurship or innovation in government or you name it. That doesn't exist everywhere. And so it's pretty rare and unique. And I think as Ohioans and residents, we should be really grateful for it. But I also think it's a, kind of a good reminder that, we need to be building kind of the tech community in ways that, if that does change, we're not kind of, feeling like we're out of luck.
Yeah, no kidding. And I'm curious. So, and to your point, I mean, you know, technology can get a bad rap.
Yep.
There are very serious challenges that we have around sustainability, and so especially with artificial intelligence.
Yep.
It requires massive amounts of power due to its dependence on
Mhm.
massive amounts of compute. And those kinds of things. So sustainability,
Yep.
obviously, things around the development of AI models and so forth that might have bias in them, is a part of what OhioX does. Is tries to achieve some level of, of predictability, and when you do have government officials that come and go,
Yep.
helping to make sure that those investments and that passion and the opportunities and so forth that we're trying to drive here in Ohio maintain at a relatively consistent level.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point because, whether it's our Governor DeWine or Lieutenant Governor Husted or groups like Jobs Ohio, those are just one piece of our governmental system. There's a lot of other elected officials. There's a whole state house of state representatives and state senators that, of course, that's where the budgets, and that's where the dollars and cents get spent and get allocated. And admittedly, most elected officials do not have a technology background.
Hmm.
A lot of reasons for that. One of which is, it's being an elected official in Ohio, a state rep, a state senator. It's not technically a full time job, but it is, and so they don't really reward people or pay them for a full time job.
Hmm.
But kind of the expectations are that you spend full time on it. And so what happens is it's a lot of small business owners that have the flexibility to spend half the year in Columbus and to be traveling back and forth. Sometimes it's a lot of lawyers, farmers, those types that kind of have an ability to be away. But if you have a job at a Fortune 1000 company working in the IT department, can you spend 45 or 50% of your time doing elected official work while also keeping a full-time tech job? It's like, no, you can't.
Right.
That's just not reality. And so
Right.
most just don't have a technology background, and so we spend a lot of time, whether it's at our own events or other people's events, or we do roundtables, or oftentimes elected officials like going into businesses to see things firsthand. But when we meet them, um, you know. Usually the first conversation is like, well, we're from the tech industry and the tech sector, and we'd love to talk to you about tech. And they kind of like, well, I don't know what you want to talk about because like I don't really have all that much insight, and I don't know who the tech
Hmm.
employers are in my district. And we tell them a couple things. Well, one, every company is a tech company. Doesn't matter if you're insurance, it's a tech company, or financial
Well
services,
said.
it's a tech company. And two, tech and innovation, it meets them at whatever area or interest or passion they have. And so we'll meet with a lot of elected officials and they'll say education's my number one, or healthcare, or housing. And it's like, well, great. We can actually talk technology and innovation in all those areas. It's not just a social media app per se, or it's not just a data center. It can be, again, insurance companies that employ people in their district, or if
Hmm.
you're thinking about K through 12 education, well, how are teachers thinking about artificial intelligence and generative AI around teaching their students? Or, have you heard about these companies that are doing innovative work to help with, the housing shortage and the housing crisis we have certainly in Central Ohio? And when we kind of like have those conversations in that way, you often see their kind of eyes light up of like, oh, I didn't really think of like tech is not just IT, or tech is just a
Right.
California based company, but it's everything. And we come armed with like, oh yeah, you should talk with this teacher in your district, they're doing some great work with AI in the classroom. Or hey, here's a startup that's doing really awesome innovations in the healthcare space. You haven't heard of them because they're just busy building. They don't have a full-time kind of public affairs or government relations team. They're just like building. And so
Right.
we try to meet people where they're interested at, because every company is a tech company. We just have to be able to tell those stories of the impact that every sector and every industry is. So whether it's agriculture, which is a big segment of Ohio, or traditional employer bases like insurance or financial services or healthcare or manufacturing, each of those obviously has a tech story. And so we just have to be able to tell that, to help our elected officials see that it's not just your traditional industries that are kind of driving Ohio, but it really is tech and innovation, and it's
Hmm.
big companies, small companies, and everything in between.
Heck yeah. How would you recommend the tech community get involved?
Yeah, great question again. And that's partially why we exist, is there wasn't really an outlet for this type of work. And the advocacy stuff, that's like 5% of what we do. But every year we do a state house day where we go to the state house. It's typically in April every year, and we bring tech people from across the state so they can meet directly with legislators. And we would love to have as many people each year. It keeps getting bigger and bigger. And we want tech to come, and that's what we say every year. It's kind of the tagline of it is we're bringing tech to the state house. We want to
Wow.
be able to do that. And we're doing more and more in the state house as a physical location. Sometimes it's not necessarily a government focused event, but simply so we can get tech people into the state house and more deeply interacting with government leaders who are already there as well. So the biggest one would be to just show up as we have these things, and our members and partners. They help us host roundtables. They help us host kind of site office visits of showing off their technology. I've been, to the 1819 Innovation Hub in Cincinnati, for instance, with
Hmm.
a couple different members of the state legislature previously, where they got a tour and we helped set that up. We invite them to our things. At our last corporate innovation summit that we held at Rev One Ventures, we sent out the invitation, and I see in the front row a couple state representatives that just want to sit there and learn because they were passionate about it. And so,
Heck yeah.
doing things like this, the more that we can tell these stories outside, frankly, of tech and IT communities, I think is a great thing. And that's what I love about content and media, because we're, even for us, we're probably not going to get people off the street to just attend our conferences. But the
Hmm.
more we can do storytelling and show that tech is, again, every company, every business out there, and it's not just one part that kind of sticks and talks to itself. And so that's why we love opening up the state house doors and bringing people in every year. And we're doing more and more of that. So that's an open invite
Wow.
that we'd love to have you, Sean, and anyone else.
I'd love to. That sounds really exciting. Talking about all the great work that you're doing, what are you the most excited about?
Yeah, the biggest is where I get the most kind of excitement, and we're doing a lot. I'd say two things. One is we launched, it's called OhioTechNews.com. One of the frustrations, and we haven't solved this frustration, but was that, there's all this great work happening. And again, we talked about how we're really spread out between all these metro areas. And so if you look at the state of Ohio and you kind of divide it up based on the media markets. So, we're in central Ohio. And so you have the Central Ohio media market, that's Central Ohio TV, like the Columbus Dispatch. You have that a unique media market also in Cincinnati. Dayton has its own, Toledo has its own, Cleveland has its own, Youngstown has its own, Southeastern Ohio has some, and then you have like
Wow.
micro media markets where you have, places like Canton, where they're technically in the Cleveland TV market, but they have their own paper, or Akron, and a bunch more like that. And one of the frustrations people would say is, hey, I'm in my pocket. And this is kind of the thesis to OhioX's work, where if we're in central Ohio and there's all this great news and information out there and all these tech successes that we're seeing, odds are if you go to Toledo or Youngstown or Cincinnati or Dayton or wherever, they wouldn't have heard about it because they just don't consume the same
Right.
information that you and I consume on a weekly
Hmm.
basis. And so what we did was we said, hey, when we started as an organization, every week we're going to read all these different media sources, research all this news, compile all this information, and send around a free weekly email that anyone can sign up for that can tell these stories and break down these regional silos that we just as a state have. And there's nothing wrong with kind of regionalism. Like if you're a
Mm-mm.
Browns and a Bengals fan, that's a fun rivalry. But when it comes to the Silicon Heartland opportunity, we think there's, the statewide opportunity. And so we started sending around this weekly email, and we've sent it around for like almost 250 weeks in a row. And people really loved it. But what ended up happening was, we would put something in from Cleveland, and my guess is you don't subscribe to Cleveland newspapers just because, like, you don't live in Cleveland. You don't really have a reason to. And that kept happening enough and enough where people said, like, this is great, but like, one, we have to tell more stories. And two, I can't read all the stuff you're sharing because I don't live in those parts of Ohio. And so we said, well, that's interesting. Like, what if we just started reporting on the tech news ourselves? So we created OhioTechNews.com. It's a new media platform for us. We're not journalists. We don't have that important role in society, but we're tech
Hmm.
storytellers. We're industry promoters. So we're out there to promote the positive impact of tech on our state, and all throughout the year. And we're excited for year two and going beyond of telling more stories directly to as many people as possible. And we've seen some really fascinating, like, anecdotes that have come out of it, where people even outside of Ohio will come across some of our stuff because of the SEO of it, or someone will send them a link and they'll read a story and they'll reach out to us and say, hey, I'm a San Francisco based tech company, or
Hmm.
I'm a tech professional in Seattle or New York. I'm thinking about moving back. like you were our first stop. And that's like really awesome. The other is, I was just talking with someone earlier and they were in Central Ohio. We built a story around their work, and they said that they had people reach out from other parts of Ohio that otherwise would never have heard about what they're doing. And so we created that so we can break down, kind of the silos throughout the state, tell these stories directly to people, and tell more stories than we think are possible. And so we're just getting started with it. If anything, now our trouble is we don't have the resources to do all the storytelling we want to do, and so we got
Mhm.
to figure out how to, build out our own internal capabilities.
Yeah.
But creating the content, telling these stories directly of the people and the companies and the ideas that are doing awesome stuff. It's been a ton of fun, and I'm really glad we spent a lot of time on it building it this year because it's really been taken off and it's been fun to watch.
Well, congratulations. That is really exciting. I agree with you. And talk about an awesome mission. So, when you think about kind of how technology, like within Ohio, and in particular in the companies, like you said, you said this very very well. All companies are technology companies. There's not a single company out there that doesn't use some form of technology within the context of their operations and so forth. As you think about this very unique view that you have of all of these emerging technologies and the way in which technology is being shaped and so forth within Ohio. I'm curious, looking ahead maybe 5 to 10 years, how do you see emerging technology shaping and impacting Ohio in particular?
Yeah, a hugely important question, and I think it's one that we as a state have to get right. Earlier, as I mentioned, growing up in northeastern Ohio, we've seen what automation can do to industries. And, when the rubber industry, I grew up in the rubber capital of the world. That's why my family, lived and lives in northeastern Ohio, is because of the rubber industry and companies like Goodyear and Firestone. And
Hmm.
my dad did not work for those, but he, working for suppliers. And so as we think about Intel and what that can do to the state, I'm literally in Ohio because of the supplier community for the rubber chemical industry for tires. And so I've lived firsthand what it can mean. But AI is the buzzword, but I think it's also the one that we have to get right for a lot of reasons, some of which are obvious. But some of the things we've been working on is what is AI's impact for our workforce? What does it look like for education? What does it look like as we think about a next generation of workers? And obviously with your work, you're seeing what it looks like of, and we're hearing, we see reports and we see anecdotes of, is it going to disrupt? Is it going to automate? Are we going to need as many IT workers in the future as we have today? Like, what does that look like? And no one quite knows because we don't know what
Agreed.
the world's going to look. We don't know what the AI is
Hmm.
going to look like in 5 years, let alone the world. Um,
Very true.
but it's one that, every going back to some of our work in Ohio, but then outside of Ohio, every state is trying to figure this out. Because really education in America is based at the state level in a lot of ways. There's certainly the national, stuff out of the Department of Education in DC, but it's really the state capitals that kind of drive and shape what education policy looks like. And you talk about our state house day, as I was sharing a little bit on. Well, one of our state house days, we had this fascinating roundtable with our Lieutenant Governor, John Husted. We had about 15 technologists around the table, everything from CEOs of companies to, Fortune 1000 technology professionals. And the conversation, it was a little after, just after ChatGPT's release. So it was somewhat kind of timely, but it wasn't like the week or two after, it was a few months. Um, but the conversation with him somehow just went directly into AI, and that's where it stayed. And it was
Yeah.
an amazing conversation. And it's one of those kind of meetings where I just sit back and I don't say a word because the technologist and him are just like, having this fascinating conversation that I just loved being part of and listening to. But out of that, there was this kind of central theme of like, okay, like we know what this technology does. All these technology companies are thinking about it, but what is the impact for the rest of Ohio, whether it's in our K through 12 education, whether it's for our small business community that doesn't have entire IT departments, or whether it's for non-tech companies, even though every company is a tech
Right.
company, a mom and pop small business, in a small community in Ohio, or a restaurant. they are buyers of technology. They don't have whole technology teams. And so what does this impact for them? And so since then, we've gotten to work on a host of things with the lieutenant governor around AI, its impact on Ohio, its impact on our workforce and education. We partnered with him on a couple AI forums where we did them in Cleveland and Cincinnati. We brought together
Hmm.
technology leaders from startups, from companies and orgs like the Cleveland Clinic and AWS and Procter and Gamble and Kroger. We brought university presidents to the table, community college presidents, business leaders, elected officials. So kind of like your who's who of like, industry leaders, government leaders, education leaders to talk about what AI means to Ohio, to our education, to our workforce. And since then, it's kicked off a ton of incredible work. We got to play a small role in creating an AI toolkit for Ohio's K through 12 schools to help
Wow.
each school district, whether you're a principal, a superintendent, a parent, figuring out how we can leverage this technology, make it a co-pilot versus like thinking it's a, something scary and we shouldn't be interacting with, because that's just
Right.
not the reality. It's like a calculator at some point is going to come into a classroom. Or when I was growing up, Wikipedia was the big thing of like, you can't use Wikipedia. And it's like, well, as soon as you enter the real world, you're going to use Wikipedia. So why don't we teach people how to use it correctly? And so this AI question, we've gotten to do a ton on, and I mean, again, no one's figured it out, but we've been part of a coalition of folks that have been, trying to push this conversation forward. Because especially in the K through 12 realm, if we don't figure out how to, bring generative AI into the classroom at a holistic approach where it's equitable, and we're not leaving certain parts of Ohio behind, we're going to not be in a great place, because it is a technology that is going to impact every job, as we know. It's
Yeah.
going to
Agreed.
impact every sector, every industry. And so, how can Ohio become the most AI ready workforce in the country has been a big theme that people have been exploring, and we've gotten to play a big part in a role of. And so that's one where technologists like yourself are thinking about it from a business perspective every single day. But
Yeah.
we also need people thinking about it from a workforce perspective, from an education, because if we just wait for students to graduate high school with a typical education, go to Ohio State or Case Western or University of Cincinnati and self-select into a computer science degree, it's like we've already lost like so many potential, innovation pros and technologists. And so we really have to think about like the entire workforce and what that looks like.
Right.
And I think that's in the K through 12 realm, is that we're going to find, those answers.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I will say you're absolutely right. I mean, I certainly hope there are no companies out there that are not struggling with this. There are lots of questions that need answered. I'm wondering, do you also engage in conversations, especially with with folks in government,
Mhm.
around the importance of the responsible use of AI? I mean, it feels to me, to be honest with you, correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, but it feels to me like our legislation, our legislators are a bit behind the curve here. The technology is advancing so fast, and it's leaving the business community struggling with how do we make sure that we're leveraging these tools correctly. Number one. Number two, how cautious should we be in embracing these technologies when there's potential legislation on the horizon that could disrupt what we're trying to how we're leveraging these technologies, and are there controls that the government is thinking about putting into place to make sure that that these AI technologies that we're putting in the hands of our associates on behalf of our customers, we can trust that they're not built with or trained with models that are based on data that's biased and things like that. A whole bunch of things that we need to worry about. I'm just curious, are those conversations happening in the work that you're doing with these government officials and so forth?
Yeah, 100%. Though it's a really difficult problem or opportunity, and you probably, depending on the day, problem and or opportunity to tackle, because one, government largely is not built to work fast. And that's probably most cases a good thing, where you don't want it to be
Yeah.
incredibly reactive. And just thinking again, just since ChatGPT and the generative AI, and there's obviously a lot more technologies out there. There's more AI than just Gen AI, but just using generative AI, it's a bit unique. And I remember when we first started as OhioX, kind of the hot technology at the moment was blockchain, and everyone was talking about blockchain. There were all these blockchain
Yep.
meetups, and it's kind of funny because now some of the AI experts were blockchain experts like 4 years ago. Now they're AI experts, and they had a short stint on like crypto and like Web3 in between, but like now they're AI. So that's a whole other thing that I've noticed doing this like
Lots of
5 years.
shiny objects.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of shiny objects. But so government's not supposed to be, it's supposed to be slower. And that's where I think there's a real business industry, tech industry opportunity to lead. And you
Yep.
were at our CEO retreat where, this theme of tech leadership for Ohio, because if we think about AI, for instance, you have and I'm kind of simplifying it, but you have 50 states in the US that all can do their own AI laws and rules and regulations. You then have the US government, so the federal government, which is not necessarily a beacon of efficiency or bipartisan, accomplishment these days.
Yeah.
And that's just in the United States. Now, certainly, as a global leader, people look to the United States and America for, leadership on a lot of things. But you also have the EU, and we've seen it with like data and privacy, how difficult that can be between all the different states doing data privacy laws, EU doing laws. Now you have the UK that's not part of the EU. They're looking to do their own thing and have leadership on it. And then you have countries like China. You have other actors that maybe we're not friends with. You also have ones like a Singapore or Estonia, which are very tech and innovation focused. And so what makes it kind of difficult is we live, it's not like interstate commerce where you would physically drive from, Ohio to Michigan and you cross the border and then like you can tell people to stay away or come in or whatever. The internet just obviously doesn't work that way. And so when we think about kind of government's role in it, it's really difficult. And I don't, I don't, and I say that as I don't think it's easy. And so I very much empathize with the task at hand of it, because you have all these states that want their input. And so if a California wants to do something versus a Virginia versus Ohio versus a Colorado, that you have 50 potential states all competing on this. And so if one state passes an AI law here, one state passes an AI law there, and they say completely different things, like as a business, an insurance company, for instance, how do you deal with that? Like, and I
Right.
keeps the lawyers busy, I guess, but it's probably not a lot of fun for everyone else. Then you have the federal government, and so if they're to pass something that that supersede, or is that not? Then you have EU. So it's just there's so many layers to this, and that's where I really think that the tech industry, in specific, and the business industry more generally, can really lead on some of this stuff and has to. Now that said, as you know, with this stuff, you could have some startup out of some foreign country that just like says, I'm going to completely ignore what everyone else is doing. And I'm not going to care about responsible AI. I don't care about the guardrails.
Right.
And that can completely disrupt everything because, in a non-internet, kind of digital economy world, if something's happening halfway across the globe, physically, and I'm not walking it, like, say food safety, for instance, like, the food safety in a foreign country, unless I'm visiting there, it doesn't affect me on a day-to-day basis. But something on the internet, I may not know where that originates from. And so it's just so incredibly
Right.
difficult when we think about government and regulation,
Yeah.
because the internet has no boundaries, and it's just something that we're all trying to tackle. And there's a lot of countries that we're friends and allies with that are thinking about this, and that makes it complicated because everyone wants their own say. But then you also have others out there that maybe aren't thinking about it as responsibly, or want to take advantage of some certain things, and that can be a really difficult proposition. And so that's where I think, to kind of wrap up this long comment, but it's really, really tough. And I think the more that the industry itself can lead, and the technologists can come at it with a responsible AI perspective and pushing one another, I think that's a really good thing for society.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'll just say, hey, thank goodness we have OhioX. And it sounds like you've got your work cut out for you, man.
A little bit, although this isn't something that we're experts in either. And so when we get to do our
Yeah.
stuff and, sit down with government, and, we love bringing the technologists to the table, and it's our
Hmm.
job to just, kind of help educate both sides of like, hey, this is what government's thinking and seeing, and vice versa, because
Yeah.
we need that two-way dialogue. And I think for too
Yeah.
long, um, we had one of our state house days, and an elected official was with us, and he was kind of telling the story about like why this work that we're doing is important. And he mentioned, this conference table we were at, it had, just say 15 seats. And he's like, historically, I sit down with every business industry, every sector, regularly, but I've never sat down with the tech industry. And so if you look at the 15 seats, each one represents a different industry and different sector in
Hmm.
our state. Um, and there's always that one empty seat where tech never had a seat at the table. So he's like, I'm really thankful that this community is showing up, because historically it just hasn't, kind of had the same type of organization, the same type of community that brings it together. And that's what we're trying to do is all the other ones. And so definitely the work cut out for us, but there's a lot of others that are, leading the charge too.
Well, I believe it. I get the sense you are really about community and really about the team and everything else. I am really interested to get to know you a bit more, and if you don't mind, why don't we talk a little bit about your career and maybe just share with our audience, some of your top career accomplishments and some of the key milestones that have sort of defined your journey as have become the president and CEO of OhioX.
Yeah. So I joked that my last real job is I worked in state government, and that was a lot of the inspiration for doing this. Was I saw firsthand how government didn't really have a connection with a statewide tech sector or community. Um, when we started in the state doing a lot of technology projects, and I can share a couple in a moment. We didn't have an outlet to go, and so I very vividly remember the more we were doing it led to this question of like, well, what does tech look like in Ohio? What are the companies out there that we can perhaps partner with or learn from? And I would go down to Cincinnati, for instance, meet with a bunch of people down there, say, well, this is great. Like, who should I meet with in Cleveland? And, this organization exists down here. Does a similar one exist up in Cleveland? And it's like, they're like, we don't know. Like, it's 3.5 hours away by car. Like, why would we know what Cleveland's up to, or Columbus or Toledo? And so we had to go around, and I again remember meeting people in Cleveland and Cincinnati and Columbus and elsewhere, Toledo and Akron, and every city had its own kind of unique answer to what does tech look like. And so, that was a bit of my personal inspiration for doing this. Was there was all this great work happening, but it was based on the city we're in. And so we, you know, said, hey, like after I'd left government, thought, hey, let's do something about this. And a small group of us said, hey, we see some needs where there's some frustration around we don't get the credit that we think tech in Ohio deserves. You don't have to go to the coast to do serious technology. Like the work is happening here. The people are
Hmm.
doing incredible things. The leaders are building awesome things. We just got to do a better job of telling it and then connecting it all. So hopefully we can increase this opportunity, because our thesis is that it's like Silicon Valley, where if you go out there, go from Palo Alto to Berkeley and stop in downtown San Francisco, Silicon Valley is a region. It's not a single city. It's not,
Right.
just downtown San Francisco. It's a big area. Um, Driving in the Bay Area, you're going to spend a few hours in the car, spend a lot of money in gas, and sit in a lot of traffic. Well, I can be door to door in Cincinnati, which I'll be in a couple days in 90 minutes. And so we think that that's the Ohio opportunities, where if we can kind of connect it all, promote it, and advocate for it, there's really, really, amazing growth opportunity. And that's the kind of Ohio tech hub that we talk about.
Hmm.
And so, building this has been a ton of fun. But when I was in government, we got to work on some cool things. So I was part of the team that made Ohio the first state in the country at the time to accept cryptocurrency for tax payments. And that was a lot of fun. That's where I met a bunch
Oh
of
yeah.
people in Cleveland, for instance, because there was a whole blockchain movement up there at the time. And we were like the third government, I think, in the world or something like that. And so that was a really fun one I got to do. And so doing those little projects in government, and they weren't little projects, but my role was little. I got to just see all that was, happening, and every day and every week I was learning more. I left government at some point, was doing stuff in the private sector, and this kind of idea and this thesis kept gnawing at me of, well, why does every other sector and industry in Ohio have a group like this, but tech doesn't? And so
Right.
one thing led to the next, and here we are.
Good for you. That is awesome. What a great story. And as you've sort of journeyed across the state and across the country, what would you say are the most valuable lessons that have propelled your success?
Yeah, I think, how OhioX started is I wouldn't recommend doing something like this to others. It's to start a nonprofit startup just as COVID is hitting is really stupid. And most groups like us, whether it's in Ohio and other sectors or industries or across the country, typically start one of a few ways. One is government says, "Hey, we need to build out this sector or industry. Here's a bunch of money." Two is a bunch of companies come together and say, "Hey, we need to kind of band together and work on some bigger things, big picture things, maybe workforce or maybe relationship with government that they need to
Hmm.
improve." The third is maybe like a billionaire tech entrepreneur that had an exit says, "Hey, I'm going to start something like this." Well, we had zero of those three things. It was all just myself and a few other volunteers and people that kind of thought that this idea was worth exploring. And so we all did it as volunteers. We didn't have any money when we started. As I would travel the state or talking to people or buying the website, like I was just paying for all that out of pocket. And so the
Wow.
whole time, it's all been about building relationships kind of with people. They become members, they become partners, and then the things that we work on as an organization, one, we have to do it in partnership with our members because we're not big enough to do it by ourselves. And so much of what we have done is really revolved around doing it in collaboration with others. And I think of our Ohio Tech Summit, as small as that started out, it started because I went to a class, an MBA class up in Cleveland that was visiting local businesses to learn about innovation at all these different companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 type companies in Cleveland. And so that just naturally kickstarted and grew into something bigger and really snowballed. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, it's really in partnership with folks, and that's been the most rewarding for sure.
Well, I have to imagine with all of the work that starting to your point, starting a company, nonprofit during COVID, sort of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, traveling across Ohio, you have to, struggle with maintaining some form of, work life harmony. So, as you've sort of embarked on this journey and so forth, how do you manage to balance to ensure that to ensure your well being while you're staying so involved as the CEO of OhioX?
Yeah, you have to, and I think it's anyone that's doing anything, whether you're an entrepreneur or just you have a big business job or you're managing people, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're just not going to serve
Hmm.
your company or your team or your family or your personal life well. And so there's definitely been a few times where I've felt close to burnout, frankly, because it's very easy where in our world it can be waking up at 4 a.m. to be out the door by 4:30 for a breakfast in Cleveland, and then you have to be back that night, and then maybe the next day be in Cincinnati, and so you can very easily kind of fall into this trap of like I got to be in everywhere at the same time and hit the road and just constantly be on the go mode. One, you can't because you can't be everywhere. I haven't figured out how to clone myself, and I don't think I will at this point. And so, you really have to kind of think of yourself. And so, one of the big rules on our team that I've been proud of is we don't communicate or talk to each other on weekends or after, 6 p.m. And I
Hmm.
say, because we have people that are part time and fractional. And so we've had, for instance, moms that say, "Hey, I work best in the evening." It's like, well, that's fine. Like, do the work whenever works for you, but just like schedule your emails or, kind of reach out to someone like during the work hours, because what I don't want is someone, and because I've had bosses where, they're blowing you up at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night or 10 o'clock on a or 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And even if it's a 30-second call that boss maybe thinks is like, not a big deal, like you immediately like, make this flip the switch where you're thinking about work.
Hmm.
And so, you know, respecting kind of, that 9 to 5 and making sure that when you're off, you're off. That doesn't mean that I'm not working at night or on the weekends or early mornings.
Sure.
But I just don't want people to think I have the expectation of them or for us to get into the habit of like, "Hey, I'm going to be texting you at like 6 a.m. on Friday morning just because I'm up and working and it's good for me." I don't know what
Right.
the other person on our team is going through or, what their life looks like
True.
in that daily moment. And so that's something that I've been really proud of, and the intentionality. That said, what we do is not rocket science. We literally work with people that, are doing rocket science or like doing brain surgeries. And so,
Oh, yeah.
we also keep that in mind, that our work is important, and the time that, we get from people and their investment, both in time and money as an organization, is really important.
Mhm.
But, we're not doing the real important stuff. Our members and partners are. And so, we try to keep that in mind too. It's just kind of perspective, which I think, we can all use. And having started this in COVID, we've seen the ups and downs of the world. And so I think just perspective is always good.
Yeah, I would agree. How do you, stay sharp? You know, I know you're very humble and modest, and I agree. I mean, we're not rocket scientists. We work with rocket scientists and so forth. Well, you do at least. How do obviously you have to be conversant with these technologies. You have to have a fairly deep understanding. How do you, stay current on technologies that are advancing so rapidly?
Yeah, well, I actually tell people that I don't know anything about tech. And so, but our job is to bring people and help promote others. And so, we get a ton of people that reach out of like, "Hey, can you speak on this?" And it's always, "No, you should
Hmm.
go talk to our member that does this or a member that does that." And that's really our role. Um, but for me personally, I do enjoy learning, whether it's, stuff in my personal life or for work. I'm a big visual learner. So like I love watching YouTubes, where I like reading stuff, but like, if I can watch a video on it, I think
Yeah.
that's most effective for me.
Hmm.
So that's probably the biggest is, kind of talking with smart people, where I can pick their brain, and we have a whole, community of that, which I'm really, really grateful for. And that's really unique.
Yeah.
And I don't take that lightly at all. Things on YouTube are a big one. And then, running this type of organization, I've never done this before. I've never worked at an organization like OhioX before. And so we're part of a national group called the Technology Councils of North America. And I just joined their board of directors so I can give back to that organization, hopefully more in a volunteer role,
Hmm.
where we get to talk with the people doing our work in other states. And so I get to pick their brain and learn from them. And that's where I get to geek out most, is actually how to run organizations like this. Because when we get all of our technologists together for AI roundtables or anything else, that's not about me. That's making a platform and a community for our folks to come together and share and learn. And I love it because I can, have a front seat to all these people doing amazing things. But I love it when I get to talk to people that do my type of work in other sectors, other industries, or other states, because I can learn a ton from them. And that's when I find those are some of my most fun weeks, because then I get to bring back fresh ideas to our work, and hopefully, make our organization a little bit better.
Heck yeah. Yeah, and the word that comes to mind as you're describing this is leadership. You are leading this company. You're working with other leaders at the state level and with all these different partner companies and so forth. So sort of maybe shifting our focus to talk a little bit about leadership. I'm curious, in your experience, what leadership qualities or skills do you believe have the most significant impact on leading teams and organizations effectively?
Yeah, the biggest is, and I don't think I have this down pat, and it's something, whether it's being a good leader or just being a good teammate, you have to work at every day. And
Hmm.
if you think that you've solved it one day and you're you have all the answers the next, that's just not the case. You're going to get humbled real quick. But for me, it's servant leadership. And you know, for us, it's the easiest form of like, people ask what I do, and sometimes maybe people think that, when they see me speaking at something, it's like the coolest thing in the world, and it is. It's a really neat, opportunity, and again, I'm very grateful for it, and honored that people show up and want to attend our things, and listen to things like podcasts or our media.
Hmm.
But what a lot of people don't see is like our team that's sitting there and like setting up the chairs, and you do your cloud nirvana. Like, we get all these
Yep.
people that very kindly say like, "Hey, I want to get involved." And most people are fantastic, and they do get involved, and that's great. But you also get this kind of interesting segment that they'll like want to get involved, and you're like, "Great, well, what would you like to do?" And they're like, "Well, I don't know, like, what do you need help with?" I'm like, "Well, we're about to set up chairs in 30 minutes for 500 people." And they're like, they kind of look at me like I'm nuts. I'm like,
Right.
well, this doesn't just
Yeah.
exist. Like, we're stuffing name tags and we're setting up chairs. And like, did I think I'd be doing this 5 years ago? No, but I love it. And like,
Yeah. And it's
it's
important
just
work.
fun. Yeah,
It's not
and a lot of times, those folks will think that, there's some magic boardroom that we're all sitting around just strategizing in, and it's like, no, we're like talking about ideas when we're setting up
Oh,
chairs or
yeah,
stuffing
man.
name tags. And so, I'm doing that with the team, and I view it as like, even as we're growing, even again, we'll never grow huge, but we are growing, and the more folks we bring in, like I want them to see like that I'm most proud that I've literally done everything at the organization. And
Right,
so, you bring in someone and they're like, not, and this hasn't happened here, but I've seen it in other jobs where they'll complain they got to do a task or a role. And it's like, there is not one aspect of OhioX that as we grow, whether it's with staff members or volunteers or anyone else, that I will ask someone to do that I have never done myself before.
mhm,
We have literally had like 500-person conferences where I stuffed 500 name tags and forgot to print them in an alphabetical order. So then I had to rearrange them all like in the 3 or 4 nights, and I would like
I
watch,
believe it.
baseball for 4 nights at 9 to 10 p.m. while I'm like stuffing these stupid name tags because I didn't put them in alphabetical order just because they had to get done. So, like, I'm most proud that I've done everything at the organization. And as we bring on team members, I get to delegate a few things. I'm still setting up chairs, but like, there's nothing that they will have to do that I've never done and I don't
Right.
appreciate because I know exactly what goes into it. And if
Mhm.
someone ever print name tags that isn't me, I will make sure to remind them to print them alphabetically.
Excellent. Lessons, learned under pressure.
Mhm.
Yes, I hear you, man. So speaking of, being in high stakes sort of, situations, I have to imagine you've undoubtedly had to make difficult decisions, and while under pressure. How do you navigate those moments? And, how do you maintain clarity in these high stakes situations?
Yeah, so with OhioX, there's not a ton that we do. Although, we have these big events, and that's just one segment of what we do. And again, it, but like when people, you have 600 people showing up that are going to spend a day and they've invested. Maybe they've taken a day
Mhm.
off. Maybe they went to their boss and said, "Hey, I really want to spend $100 on this ticket." Like I take that very seriously that people are willing to show up, spend their day with us away from, their work, oftentimes traveling a couple hours from other parts of Ohio. And so, I put a lot of frankly stress on myself when we get into our heavy event season, because I want to make sure that if people are going to show up, we're not the biggest organization in the world. So if they're looking for like Las Vegas style stuff and like pyrotechnics, like we're not the group for you. Like you can go to Vegas to find that, those types of conferences. But,
Mhm.
we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that it's worthwhile both in time, with time and money and energy, for people to take time away from their jobs, sometimes their families, if they spend the night before or after to come to our things. And so those are probably for me in my current role, the most, kind of difficult, as I think about just our responsibility, because that to me is a really, really big thing. And so,
Right.
the biggest again, I mentioned this earlier, but perspective in terms of, you know, making decisions that you'll be proud of in 2 or 3 years, um, as opposed to like, how's this going to get me out of it today? And so sometimes that's, are we going to make a little bit less money in order to, have a better lunch that people are going to like want to come back the next year? Stuff like that,
Right.
just as a small nonprofit, you definitely have to like factor in.
Yeah.
I've also seen, just in government where, you can do stuff and bosses will have it show up on the front page of a newspaper blasting them, or editorial boards will be blasting a decision someone made. And that's okay. There's going to be people that disagree with you, but as long as you do things for the right reason, and you're going to be proud of it in a couple years, using that perspective versus like what's the immediate payoff or the immediate
Right.
reward. Kind of like setting up chairs. Like I don't want to be setting up chairs for the next 20 years. But I've been doing it for the last 4 because that's just what we've had to do. And so, it's just something where I think, again, using that same word again, but perspective of just coming to things with a mindset of, is this the right decision, not just for today, but most importantly, will be something that you'll be proud of, in the future and look back on, even if it may be a difficult decision one way or the other.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, and you've clearly built Ohio X through trial and error.
Yeah.
We talked about the name tags issue
Yeah.
earlier.
Yes. Yes. There's no playbook.
There's no playbook, and failure is inevitable in leadership. It's inevitable in life. How do you handle failure, both in your professional growth and when leading others through setbacks?
Yeah. I don't know if I handle failure well, to be honest.
Welcome to the club.
Yeah, yeah. So if someone's figured it out, I would say the biggest thing for me is just to again realize that careers are long. And even
Hmm.
in doing this 4 and 5 years, we've gotten to work with people that have had multiple jobs. Like, and so you work with them when they're in one job, and then they leave for a promotion or other reasons, and they're at another one, and maybe they're now at a third, and it just goes to show that it's all about people and relationships, and things come and go, and people change jobs. And so yeah, I mean, with failure, it just you kind of have to take the bigger approach, and that's something that like I look back on stressful times, maybe when I was in government or starting OhioX with no money in the bank and a global pandemic is hitting. And it's kind of that perspective again to use that same word
Oh
of
yeah.
like, okay, I've been through something a little bit more difficult than this. Like literally no money. I'm putting money into this organization that's about bringing people together, and a global pandemic just hit. We're like Cloroxing our apples and our groceries, and the stock market's crashing. Like whatever is going to go wrong tomorrow is probably not going to be as bad as that, and that's completely out of my control. Like
Right.
when we launched this thing, COVID wasn't a thing yet, or maybe it was in like a scientific journal at the moment,
Hmm.
but for the rest of us, it wasn't. And you kind of just realize that like careers and lives are hopefully long, and a lot of things will come and go, but you do things the right way with a focus on the people and the partnerships and the relationships behind it all,
Yeah, well
and things
said.
will probably work out.
Yeah, very well said. Talking about careers and getting started in your career, a big part of our community are folks that are coming out of college and looking for their first job, or looking for their second job, or changing careers and aspiring to be in technology. Um, I want to be very respectful of your time. So, first of all, thank you so
Mhm.
much for being here today. But in closing, what advice would you give someone eager to walk in your footsteps, especially those early in their technology careers?
Yeah. Well, first is a don't do what I did. This was not a good business plan. And looking back, like, we'll never. Yeah, again, it's a nonprofit, and that's a different world and metric of
Hmm.
success. But like, yeah, don't do this. But no, but seriously, you know, I would say the biggest is if you have a passion for something, go for it, do it smartly. And I could have probably
Yeah.
done this a lot more smartly, um, of like not going all in on something that, that was modeled like this. Because when we started, not a lot of people cared what we were doing, or we would reach out to say, hey, we have this OhioX idea. And a lot of people, frankly ignored us and didn't, care, or were dismissive, or, some people would be like, this is a stupid idea. And we haven't had all the success in the, like, so we're still every day trying to prove,
Oh yeah.
this idea and grow it. But you know, if you have an idea, I would say go for it, because I have a real honor to meet a lot of people that are doing interesting things all across Ohio and even beyond at this point. And I meet so many people that like have these ideas, and they'll spend 10 or 15 minutes at an event, or if we grab coffee, 30 minutes or an hour, and they don't do anything with them. And that's okay if it turns out not being a good idea. But
Mhm.
I had one, guy who's a friend. He reaches out, and he had this idea, and he's like, keeps talking to me about it. And he had mentioned it before. And I set up another call because, he's someone that I like and I know. And then we got to the end of it, and I was just like, hey man, like, so I'm getting the sense you want me to do something with your idea. Like, what have you done with it? And he was like,
Mhm.
well, this. I was like, that's not really anything actionable. Like, that's just like talking to people. Like, what have you actually done about it? And I don't mean, and said this to him. I was like, I'm not trying to be like difficult, but like, I'm actually trying to figure out like what progress have you made, because you've been talking about this for a long time and I don't
Yeah.
quite understand it. And he was like, I guess I really haven't made any progress. I was like, good. Well, you admitted that. Like, that's good. And so
Oh yeah.
come back to me when you actually like have written something down or put together. And he's never come back to me. And so all these people have ideas, and a lot of people, have good ideas, but there's not a lot of people that are taking ideas and good ideas and executing with them. And so I think there's just a whole world of opportunity for people that want to try something new, and whether it's building a new business or, getting a group of young technology professionals together for coffee every Friday morning at Stoff's on Grandview Avenue, just
Yeah.
because that's a good way to meet people and build a relationship and build a community and build a network. Like, just start doing it. Like, you don't have to spend money on stuff. You can go raise a bunch of money and create a startup, but like, there's so much that people can make progress on just by getting a few like-minded people together, and
So
seeing
well
where it
said.
leads to. And so that's my biggest is like, just don't wait for permission if you have something that's gnawing at you, and just find like-minded people that share similar passion and belief of you, or can push you or challenge you to make you better. But just start. And I think that's the biggest is just going after it, because
Love
a
it.
lot of people have ideas. I see them all the time. They're always asking us to take their idea and run with it. We don't have that capability, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that they can't do it and find success with it. And so I would say the biggest is just going for stuff.
I love it. Yeah, and I imagine that first, when that idea was gnawing at you, and just imagining what that first step was. And again, you've very well laid out how you've made mistakes along the way, but
Yeah.
you're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing it. Ohio X is a real thing. You're making a difference, and other people can follow in your footsteps. And it really just takes that one step.
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing.
I always like reverse engineering of like, don't think of like all that we do today, but like what's one act, like building building a website, or,
Uh-huh.
again, you have 5 people that, like, put them on a text chain and go grab coffee and talk about it. Like, something
Hell
simple
yeah,
like
man.
that. And you can test and iterate. I mean, the amount of stuff that we've tried that, like, if you remember Clubhouse during COVID, like the social, like, we tried to do like a Tuesday night, like, Ohio
Mhm.
Tech meetup, and like 6 people showed. I mean, looking back on it, COVID was a blessing for us, because we were going to try to do these things in person, and no one
Yeah,
would have showed because they didn't know what was going on. And why should someone in Columbus care about what's happening in Cleveland or Cincinnati? And 3 people would have showed up, and it would have been really awkward, and they never would have come back. And so this
there you go, man.
blessing for us of COVID was we got to work. The silver lining amidst all the awfulness was we got to build a community for essentially 2 years digitally and online. And by the time we were able to do things in person again, knock on wood, and thankfully, we had a community that was already built in, and our first event sold out. But like, that wouldn't have sold out in the first 2 years. We would
Yeah.
have looked like idiots doing something like that. And so, it's baby steps. And to your point, just doing
Yeah.
one small actionable thing can, really lead to some amazing stuff.
Yeah, and it kinda comes back to what you were saying earlier. It's all about perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, well said. Well, thank you, my friend. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you tonight, and, I really count myself lucky to include you in my tribe of mentors. So, thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Sean. This is fun. I love what you're doing. I love what, Cloud Nirvana is all about, and what you've been leading. And again, another
Thank you.
perfect example where, you start something with I'm sure a few folks talking about an
Yep,
idea over a beer or a coffee, and now you're taking it
yep,
to other parts of, other cities, other parts of Ohio. And
yep.
I'm rooting for you guys to keep
Thank you.
building it, and, maybe go internationally at some point.
Thanks, my friend. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you.